Losing a child is one of the most painful things any parent can ever go through, because as parents, they want us to bury them. We want to be the one to be buried by our children and not vice versa. So when we lose our children, when our parents experience our death, it is one of the greatest pain that a parent can experience. And in today's video, we are talking about the loss of children, particularly small children, and miscarriaging and abortion as well included, and how that impacts us and our system, and how we can move forward with that. This is a session following my very first offering here on YouTube, the very first video I did, which was about resourcing ourselves after grief or during grief, and how to move with grief. And the responses I was getting, I got messages from mothers that have lost a child through miscarriage, and and I saw other that were young children, and that's why I came up here today to look into that, the loss of children. Firstly, I would say I want to first differentiate between abortion and miscarriage, at least to say how I see it, and which will be the choice. The choosing to do an abortion will be, for me, what I see is different alternatively between the miscarriage. And so I acknowledge that when it comes to an abortion, there's a lot of guilt around that choice, and there's a lot of shame around that choice as well. And maybe even society might add more to that by also having like shame associated with that. So I don't want to dismiss all of that, because all of that is real. And I just want to also say that I acknowledge that. And if you are feeling all of those feelings, that shame or the guilt, I would say it is part of that choice. It is part of the consequence of that choice. And whatever the reason the choice was, of course, the reason, I'm not judging the choice or the reasons or whatever, but it is something that you then have to bear, unfortunately, until you kind of put it to rest for yourself, that you had to make that decision. And maybe you would always carry that guilt, and I think that's then maybe the cross you gotta bear for that choice. And with miscarriage, when we miscarry a child, there's a lot of also grief that comes with that. And it's kind of permitted to grieve that child because, you didn't make the choice. Whereas when it's an abortion, we tend to not grieve the loss of that child, which I think, whether we consciously or not, we do go through some form of grief, even if it means the grief is ignoring it completely. Because I honestly think, whether or not, in whatever the child didn't make it, whether it was our choice or it was out of fate, the process of grieving that human being is still going to take place. And even though we might not feel we are allowed, or you might not feel you are allowed to actually grieve something that you chose to do it, grieving is important because it's kind of us accepting or allowing the new normal, accepting that okay, now the baby is not here, or if we're grieving like an older child, or older, I mean maybe a 5-year-old, or it's also kind of going through a process where we learn the new normal. We learn to live now without this person that had now passed, and we learn to then include them in other ways in our lives, which will bring me to the children that were born, and it's much easier for us to include children that were born, but also it's easier for us to try and move on from that pain of losing our children. We might try to kind of forget or to rush through the process of grief by forgetting. And I'm remembering this commenter, I'm not quite sure what they said exactly, but I remember to the effect of, to the lines of, they've just lost their child who was, I think, below 12, and in a few weeks ago, and they didn't know how to cope. And I remember just thinking time, because you now need to learn to live with this new normal. You now need to learn to live without your child. And I think of it as when you first had the child, you had to learn how to live with them. You had to learn how to care for them. You had to learn how to kind of raise them up and bring them to society. And in the same way, we have to then again go back to learning to live without them. And learning takes time. So is the process of grief. So as much as all the support system might want us to kind of move on from that and to forget about it, and as quickly as possible, that always proves to not work, because actually then we just can't cope. On that video that I'm referencing, I would advise to watch if you are dealing with grief and you're wanting to support yourself to deal with grief. Because in that video I'm doing a model constellation where we are resourcing ourselves and kind of finding ways to include the person in our lives. To remember their birthdays, to celebrate them in whatever ways, to include them in the family by telling the children that would come, and by keeping them alive in us, in our hearts, because they were here, we know that. Okay, I would like for you to grab some preps. And of course, I'm using my very favorite dollies. You can use anything, really. Anything that you can hold in this session here. If you are doing this session for an abortion or a miscarriage or a stillbirth, it's still the same, I would say. Of course, the feelings are all going to be different, and particularly if it's an abortion, like I said earlier. So I would say give yourself grace and be gentle with yourself, even if you are having a lot of guilt and with regarding to your decision. I would advise that you take a prep or something to represent your child. So let's say this will be what is representing your child. It can also be a stone. That would work well. I have a crystal here. So it can also be a stone or just like a small stone that you get in the river or something. Something that you can hold. So I want you to hold this and imagine this as this is now representing the child that didn't make it, the child that you made the choice to terminate, or if it wasn't your choice, the child that didn't make it and it was miscarried. But they were there, you know that they were there. Depending on your own culture and practice and religion, I would advise that you moderate the session to that, and you obviously include what your culture or your religion might suggest to you. But I would suggest, or I have advised most of my clients in the past to name the child, because having a name is one thing that feels like you are included in the family, because you get a name, then you get a surname, then you kind of are initiated in that family, part of them, right? So I always advise that you give them a name. And if you can't think of a name, that's fine. And if that doesn't feel okay with you to name them, then you don't have to name them, of course. But I'll name this one, and I'll just say, Cynthia. I don't know why. So this is Cynthia, and she was miscarried, or she was aborted. After we name her Cynthia, I want you to then stay with this feeling. This was your child. This is your baby. And I want you to say to them, you were here. You were here. You know that they were here. You know that they were here. In your womb, they lived there. And you know that they were here. And that's an acknowledgement for yourself as well. To acknowledge that you know that they were here, and now you gave them a name or not, but you know they were here and they are part of your family. And you can tell them that they belong to this family. And if you now have other children, and maybe this was your first child that you aborted back before you had children, you can then actually say in order, like, you are the first one. Because what happens actually when you look into families in a systematic way is that the children that usually follows an aborted child or miscarriages, and they didn't know, they somehow always carry for both, because it's like they know they're not in the right position. They know they're not the firstborn, if that's the case, and there's always gonna be something that won't sit right with them. And especially if it was a violent miscarrying or an abortion, the child that then follows that womb will also live in that environment, would also carry that, and they would know something, and they would, if they don't acknowledge it and know, oh yeah, I'm not the first one, someone else was here before me, and I don't have to live for two, so to speak. And I've seen it with clients when, they don't understand with their children, like they would act up in ways that didn't make sense, and they seem to be living for two, or hyper achieving, until they recognize that, there was someone before me, and I'm not the first one, and or I'm not the only one. It helps the children as well, what I've seen. But also, most importantly, it helps us include them and make peace with that, and help us in our grieving for them. So whatever feels right with your stone or whatever your prep is for you, I want you to keep this. It's like include it maybe where you have pictures of the family or everyone. You can go and place that rock there as a symbol of, this is part of the family. This person is also part of the family. And you might tell people, you might not tell your family members, but you have included them yourself. Now, if the child was a stillbirth, it is a bit easier to include them or to even give them a name nowadays. I know back in the days, the doctor or the midwife would quietly take the child, but nowadays I think it's much more included than a miscarriage or an abortion, but it's still not really included. So we might have done a funeral for them or not. If we do have a funeral for them, in that way we have included them. So maybe what then needs to happen for us is to include them in us as one of our children, and to be aware of that they were here, and we birthed them and they were here. So including them in that way as well, and having that representation for them, same procedure in putting them, in our room dividers or in our bedrooms or wherever we have pictures of our families or of our other children, or even in your wallet, if that feels more private enough. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the loss of children when they're older. The loss of young children now when they are, we've had them, they lived, and they were part of us. Now the real problem, so to speak, is that how do we then learn to be without them again? How do we learn to mother them when they are now spirit form? How do we become mothers of a spirit child? What does that mean for us, for the child, and how do we take that process? I think that is the first part will be really grieving them. In that previous video where I talked about resourcing ourselves, I mentioned involving the child in our lives, remembering their birthdays, even their death days, and including them, telling our other children or other people around us about them when it's a day particularly to them, but also truly learning to have a relationship with them in spirit. And I mean by that, having a relationship with someone in spirit means, it means now you're gonna have to have a relationship with them in spirit. You're gonna mother them in spirit. And maybe it won't really look like mothering anymore, like not in the physical way as we mother our children here, but it will be more for us, maybe as a mother. Now we are having this relationship where, yes, we are a mother, but we don't have to necessarily mother. We can just carry you with love. We can carry them with love and include them as much as you want in your life. But being aware that I have a child that is now in spirit, and every day finding a way to have a relationship still with them and be their mother while they are in spirit, and keep them with us, and keep them in the family as well, keep them alive in the family by telling the other children that would follow or other family members about them. And connecting to them deeply. So if this is a representation that you take for them, for example, you say this is the rock, or I'm using rock because I realize that most of my clients, most of the people I work with, they always have either shells or rocks. So no one ever have dollies like this. So that's why I'm saying rocks. But anyway, you find a representation for them, and you include them. You have it in the house, and when you are, when it's those first weeks and first months, you're gonna have to take this with, to pick it up where you place it, and once in a while take them out alone with them and just feel into their energy, and you can put them back, and you can do this as long as it takes for you, or the need for you to feel to reach for them. For example, if you have this in somewhere in the table where you have other pictures there, and it's a day where you particularly miss them, and you think about them, and you are grieving that they're no longer physical with you, you can take this representation with you today, and if you are able to, you can then spend a day with it, whether it's around you, or you specifically go to a place where they liked to go, but you take it with. This is just a representation, but you invite them to be with you, and you will feel them with you, and you have those little rituals with them as much as you need, because now you are learning to have a relationship with them in the spirit. You are learning to mother them or to father them in this new way, in this new settings that you now are in. I want to say that I have deep condolences to everyone who's going through grief of their children. Like I said in the beginning, it is such a painful thing to go through as a parent. But I hope you can find strength to learn to be a parent again in this new way that was now given to you in your path. And I hope if you are watching for someone else who is not you, but it's a friend or it's a family member, I hope you can pass this to them and help, so that we can help each other to find strength to connect with people that are in spirit realms, and to help ourselves to go through the process of grief, and to find a way to redefine a new way of being a parent with someone who's no longer there physically. Yeah, it was quite an emotional one. Thank you for being here.